Matt came in this morning and printed up a bunch of coupons off the internet, and he was mystery shopping auto shops to see what the going deal is out there for air conditioned service. And I see a lot of $19.99. I can get my air conditioning fixed for $19.99.
No, sir.
No? Come on.
Well, and what do you mean fixed? And what do you mean serviced? And what do you mean checked? That's so subjective. There's some we said setting realistic expectations. A lot of times, I mean, if your car is blowing cool air and not cold air, you've probably lost some refrigerant. There's a leak somewhere. We may or may not be able to identify that leak right away, but there's a process for going about doing that. And when you see service coupons for $19.95 to check your air conditioning that says Freon and labor is extra, what exactly is that? You really don't. That's an opportunity to pay $20 to maybe look and say, okay, we need to service it. So those are what I would call a lost leader. Now, I went and found various $29. Check the belt, check the system. I don't know what check the system means. Freon, dye, and labor are additional. It didn't fix anything.
How much was that one?
That was $29. Here's one for $19. Check belts and tighten hoses. Leaks and Freon are extra. The best one actually came from a dealership. $119. I called them. They do it the right way. We have to recover what's in the system. We need to measure. These are very delicate. Some of these systems we're measuring by the ounce, not by the pound anymore. And maybe they hold 16 ounces. So we have to know exactly how much you had in the system before we can top it off. You can't top it off before we can refill it. So the right way to do that is to recover everything. We recycle it, run it through our machine, and then recharge it. So maybe your car holds 1.6, I can't even do my math now, 16 ounces. So we pull out 8, that means you're 8 short. So we're going to add a total of 16 back. Well, we can't just arbitrarily just go adding some Freon until we think it blows cool, because you could overcharge by a couple ounces, 10%. Now you're going backwards, and overcharge will hurt the system.
Well, that's where we come up with the rules are changing. And we're talking about it continually on this show, is that what you used to do and what you do now are two different things. We used to have systems that held, I'm thinking of the old
3 pounds.
old Suburban with rear air conditioning. You could pump 5 pounds in that thing with, it was R12 back in the day. And that's not the way it works anymore. If you were off by an ounce then, it really didn't matter. If you're off by an ounce now, it's a huge difference. And Aaron was talking about they do really 2 levels. There's kind of a basic check, and I think we're talking about some basic checks. Don't really have a problem. We're going to look at the belt. We're going to look at the compressor. We're going to look for any visible signs, but there's not a lot that's going on. And something like that, I think he said maybe $39, $49, somewhere in that area, but it's not really fixing anything. And it's not even necessarily adding any Freon to the system. It's just doing the visual. You might check the pressures to see if there's anything out of whack, but that's pretty much a good working system.
Yeah, and a lot of the manufacturers are coming with dye in the system. So a lot of the services, or most all servicers, will add a dye in there, and that dye travels around with the oil that's in the system. And when it leaks, it will push that dye out with the oil, and we can see that with an ultraviolet light. So a lot of cars that have been serviced, we don't have to go through the recharge and all of that stuff. We can look at it with the ultraviolet light and our special goggles and see this stuff glowing green, like Aaron's shirt today that I just noticed. And you can do that, and that's part of that basic inspection. But then to have the expectation that $39 is going to fix your air conditioner,
right,
is not good. Now, on a car that's probably not even blowing cold air, I would suspect that we're not even going to go down the $39 route. We need to make sure that it has a full charge in it, run through, make sure the system works. Just because you have a leaking hose doesn't mean the compressor's bad, but you've got to get a charge in it and test even if it does have a leak, we don't want to just go put the hose on and then get a surprise that your compressor's no good. So we've got to get the thing working, even if it has, maybe it's not a catastrophic leak, but it's got a leak. We've got to get it working so that we're comfortable knowing that once we put the hose on, we're going to be in good shape. And this is often a two-step process.
Well, and we're talking about refrigerant. Does it have the right fill in the system? We're talking about leaks, but there's another air conditioned failure that I would think about, and that's the blower motor and the fan and the blend doors in the dashboard. So that's kind of a different route that you're going. You know, the air AC compressor may be making the system cool, but if the fan's not working that blows across that evaporative core, you have nothing.
Well, yeah, it's my AC doesn't work. So is it blowing cool air, just not cold air, or is it not blowing at all? And then there's so many. I mean, there's so many different things that we have. Could have a condenser fan motor that's bad. We could have a leak in a hose. We could have like you said, Dave, a blend door not working. And that's where it's blending hot and cold air. If you want your air to be 74 degrees, it can't be pumping all 30 degrees. It's got to use some heat to make it the right temperature in the cabin. So we've got to worry about leak sealers in the system that can damage our equipment. We've got to worry about contaminated refrigerant, which is out there.
So if I'm listening and it just got hot, so I turned on my air conditioner in my car, for the first time this week, and I haven't turned it on in months. And if it would have not worked, I'm thinking of you listening in your car saying, what do I do? What's the next step? What can be the expectation? And I think really if it's blowing cool but not cold, or it's just blowing warm, you're going to be starting somewhere really expect $100 to $200 range. That's for someone to evacuate the system, drag it all the way down to zero and pull a vacuum on it, and then refill it with the appropriate fill of Freon. So $100 to $200 is a reasonable expectation. Now, the next thing that you need to understand is this may be a two-step process. So maybe they added dye or maybe it had dye before, but now we're gonna check for obvious leaks, and sometimes we can see obvious leaks before we even put Freon in it, but not always. And there's a couple places we can't see, and some are up underneath the dashboard, and you're honestly not going to know there's a leak there unless you pull the dashboard out of the car.
Yeah, you're going up through the drain tube in the or for the evaporator or something like that, and it's just oftentimes it's a two-step deal, and you may have to come back, and that's normal.
So up first this segment, we're going to go with, looks like Paul in Gilbert on a 1999 Chevrolet Tahoe. Go ahead, Paul. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
All right. How you guys doing?
Doing great. Thank you.
Hey, okay, so I have one shop that I've gone to for a long time. I mean, I believe that my truck's been in the shop probably since my mom was the original owner of the truck. So I trust the guy, but I'm starting to do more things on my own, and I'm wondering, I had a check engine light. The truck was shaky a little bit at certain high speeds, and I had a check engine light. They said it was a cylinder 5 misfire. Now, I've replaced the spark plug wires. Where do I go next, or is this out of my hands?
And this is on the
99 Tahoe.
Cylinder 5 misfire.
No change after you did the spark plug and wire?
No, and I noticed that mostly, I mean, if I'm coming on the freeway and I stay out of the gas, just go real easy, the shaking starts around like 65 or 70, but it only lasts for a minute, and then it'll go away. But if I, get on it to, kind of merge or anything like that, I notice the shaking a whole lot more.
Okay.
And the check engine light has been on it, and it's currently off right now. So after a while, it'll turn off. But when it does, I've had it checked twice, and it says it's a cylinder 5 misfire.
And I'm sorry, you did the plug in the coil, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, normally what we would do in the shop, I mean, the easy diagnosis, and sometimes, we take it... We get the blinders on and get snake bit because, it's going to be the plug or the wire or the coil. So typically what we would do is just switch a coil and do a test drive.
From cylinder 5 to cylinder 4.
And if it follows, then you've probably got a bad coil. You've already replaced the coil, so it clearly wasn't that. Make sure you didn't damage any of the spark plugs. At this point, I'd probably be looking for some sort of vacuum leak on that car, but I would expect to maybe see a lean condition. Aaron, where would you approach this if someone brought that into Air Park? We have to start with some testing.
Yeah, we got to start with some testing. Go through the diagnostics of it. Look for vacuum leaks. Make sure that the coil is firing. Make sure you're getting power to the coil and everything to make it fire.
Yeah, you got to have compression. You've got to have
compression.
You've got to have fuel. You got to have compression, and you got to have spark. You probably have good spark with a plug and a coil. Although that coil has a short spark plug wire on it too on that model, I believe. There's a 3 or 4 inch spark plug.
How many
wire.
misfires do you guys see that are caused because of vacuum leaks? That's fairly kind of a lean misfire that you get with a vacuum leak, or is that not that common?
If it's we'll see a random misfire typically if it's a vacuum leak, but that's usually associated with maybe a mass airflow sensor failure or a lean fuel condition.
Intake gasket leaking.
Yeah, but if you have a vacuum leak that's very specific to one runner or a blown gasket, you're not going to necessarily see the lean condition. You're going to get the misfire.
We've got Steve in Queen Creek on a 97 Dodge 1500. Go ahead, Steve. You're on Bumper to Bumper.
Hey, morning, guys. Great show.
Thank you.
Hey, about 18 months ago, I mixed Dexcool with regular Prestone in my truck, not knowing that it would turn the radiator fluid pretty much to mud. So I flushed it a few times, and I've had issues with it kind of clogging and then overheating. And so last night I was driving around, and there was just this big poof of smoke or steam, and I pulled it over. It wasn't leaking or anything like that, but I couldn't find a hose that was broken. The radiator cap was still on. Do you guys have any idea where that may have come from?
Why did you add coolant in the first place? I guess that's my question.
Well, I mixed the two, not knowing that when you do that, it causes the coolant to kind of coagulate.
But what was the episode that caused you to add coolant? Did you see a leak? Did you replace a hose, or was it just low, so you added a quart or two? Or?
No, yeah, it was just low.
Okay, so it sounds like there's probably a leak. That's why it was low then. But where did your steam come from that you saw the other day?
That's what I don't know. I lifted the hood, and there was probably a gallon of fluid all over up under the hood and on the ground and everything. But I couldn't find where that came from. I couldn't find it, a hose that had split or, like I said, the radiator cap or anything like that.
Okay.
So,
well, here's where I would start. Get all that stuff rinsed off from underneath the hood. And if you can flush some just clean water, you don't need to have coolant in the system to be testing it or anything. Just let's try and get much of the gook out of it as you can. If you're mechanically inclined to do so and remove one of the heater hoses, maybe flush some water through the heater core, let's get the thing full of just water. If you want to put a little bit of Dexcool in it with water, so it'll help you maybe find the leak. Let's get it dried off under the hood. And I would just put a radiator cap on it. If it doesn't have a newer radiator cap, get one on there, because very well what could have been happening, if you don't have pressure there, the system is going to boil at a lower temperature. It's going to want to puke that out into the overflow bottle. So that might have just been blown out of the overflow. So let's start with a good pressure cap, get it full, and then that will also almost dub as a pressure test, because once it's holding pressure, now you're going to be able to look and see where the coolant might be leaking from. And then always be careful. Don't open a hot radiator cap. We don't want to see anybody get burned or hurt. Just let it cool down, or run some water across the surface of the radiator. And so the first thing is to find out where there's any leaks. Once we identify the leaks, we've got to get the leaks fixed, and at the same time, we've got to get all the gook and mud and garbage. We used to call it Dexcool death. You get that out, and then get good, fresh, clean coolant. And it might take a couple flushes. The other thing you can use is don't use dishwashing soap that you would wash your hands with. But what we use in the shop is dishwashing detergent that you would squirt
from the dishwashing machine.
Your dishwashing machine. That will clean a lot of the scale, and that will really help get oils and anything that's in there out.
So anyway, we've got a very patient Ruben in Phoenix on a 2003 F150. Go ahead, Ruben. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
And that's a 250, Dave.
250.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for the show, you guys. And it's a 2005 F250 Super Duty diesel 6.0. And I get in a really hard cold start. It rabbles a lot, and I want to know what is wrong with it. Some people tell me there is a fuel injector or the FICM. So I'd like to know either if there's injectors, there's any way can I find out which ones they are, if they have to be replaced, only the damaged ones or all of them, or the FICM model to be fixed.
Sure. Now, are you getting any smoke with that hard starting issue?
Yes.
White smoke?
No, not white.
Okay.
Well, and when it gets warming up, it runs fine. It has less power than before, but it runs fine after it warms up.
Okay. Well, a couple things. What part of Phoenix are you in, Ruben?
I'm on North Phoenix.
Okay. Well, we've got a couple. We've got 3 of the shops on Bumper to Bumper Radio that are Bosch Diesel Service Centers. So you can find those at bumpertobumperradio.com if you need help. Kurt's Auto Repair is the one in the North Valley.
We got Virginia Auto Service in Central Phoenix, and then in Chandler area we've got Automotive Diagnostics. Now,
But but back for his question, the cold starting issue. There's tons of sensors on this truck. We need to, number one, the computer needs to recognize what this temperature is outside. So if it's cold and it's 40 degrees and the computer is recognizing a signal that the sensor is telling it it's 80 degrees outside, that could be your problem. That's your first problem. The computer has to understand what the real temperature is. We very well could have a fuel injector problem. A lot of good diesel guys can tell you what the problem is by the color of the smoke coming out of the tailpipe. White is usually I don't even want to say now.
That is not me, the good diesel guy. I admittedly don't know much about diesels. I mean, other than the fact they don't have a spark plug.
Yeah, and then to the injector problem, if there is one, it just depends on the system. I mean, those are difficult to access with the F250s. A lot of times the cab has to come off. I've got one in my Excursion with nearly 90,000 miles on it. Fingers crossed, knock on some wood. It's I haven't had problems, but it's not a do-it-yourselfer kind of project. I don't think it could be the FICM, the FICM fuel injection control module. But those are expensive guesses, so it's
Right.
really something that needs a
diagnosis.
proper diagnosis. I mean, we could guess all day long, probably just like the guys that told you injectors or the module, but
Need to dial it down. Well, thanks for the call, Ruben. And again, bumpertobumperradio.com if you're looking for one of those Bosch diesel certified centers. And we've got Bill in Phoenix with a 2004 Dodge Ram 1500, and this one has gas, so I can get involved. Go
How
ahead.
you guys doing?
Good, and yourself?
Not bad. Okay, mine it's got the Hemi in it, and I've got a problem with the condenser fan motor not wanting to turn on when the AC's on, and I've replaced the condenser fan motor, and it still don't come on. Where would I go from there?
Is there a pressure switch that makes that thing work?
yeah. Now, so the condenser fan motor doesn't turn on when you turn the air conditioning on. Well, we need a roadmap. We need a wiring diagram. That's the first place I would have my guys start. Or, Aaron, I mean, depending on that, 2004 it probably has bidirectional controls, we call it, with the scanner.
Get in with the scanner and diagnose it that way to see what's going on to it.
Yeah, and what I mean by bidirectional controls, we can say, okay, computer, turn on the fan. We have, to make it simple, we have a scan tool. It's not your code reader. It's the factory deal, and usually they use laptops or a bigger console. And we can get in there and we can say, okay, we're going to turn the fan on. And then the fan doesn't come on. Well, now we have to understand, is the car following the directions of the computer, or does the computer still have the power to force that fan to come on by triggering a solid-state relay within the computer that sends the ground signal to the fan relay? So I would go back, in the absence of a scanner and controls, I would go backwards from the fan, looking at a wiring diagram.
See what's in line and go to those pieces. I mean, and if it's a relay issue, you can tap on a relay to see if that changes the situation, or a pressure switch for that matter.
Yeah, and you could take, for example, look in the fuse box under the hood in the relay center, and you're going to see, maybe you'll see condenser fan relay, and next to that, maybe there's a horn relay. Mark them, pull them out, and look and see if the connectors are the same. If they're interchangeable, just swap them, and that might help you. We need to understand how that works. Is it constantly have power and then it gets a variable ground, or does it always have power in the relay, or does it always have ground and the relay provides the power? So you're going to need a wiring diagram and a test light at least.
Thanks so much for the call, Bill. We are going to go with, looks like Al in Scottsdale on a 2005 Ford F150. Go ahead, Al. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
The problem that I have is there's a service bolt now on this, but it doesn't. When I look it up, it doesn't say anything. It's almost like as if I got something in the bed that's sliding around when I first take off.
Do you?
No, and the drive shaft and everything all looks good and solid. I took it into a place one time, and they said they did something to the drive shaft to grease it, if you have the dual shaft, which I do. But That shop closed down now. I can't find out what they did.
That's the slip yoke that they greased. And what happens on trucks is when you come to a stop or you leave a stop, the suspension compresses and releases. That means the dry shaft has to get longer or shorter, and not by much, maybe by 1/4 of an inch. But there's a special Teflon grease, and there's a bulletin from Ford for lubricating those splines so you don't get that clunking when you leave a stop. That's a pretty common one there.
And I was watching the race and almost didn't pay attention. But
bring it home.
Did we say the noise went away for a short period of time after that was greased?
Yeah, and so do they actually? Is there a grease fitting in there?
No, it's not actually a grease fitting. So what needs to happen is the drive shaft needs to be unbolted. The slip yoke needs to be taken apart, and there literally is a special Teflon grease. Ford's got their blue Teflon grease. GM has their Teflon grease, but it's a notorious problem across the industry, and it's not a lubricated spline. So otherwise, they get dry over time. They get a little bit of water in there, a little bit of rust. It's not a major repair. We pull them out and grease them for customers on a regular basis, and most of them have just come to get used to that clunking when they leave a stop. And we fix it. We don't tell them, and they're like, "Wow, man, look at that! It's smooth as silk."
What I hate though is it's normal. No, it's not normal.
It's not normal.
So you could view that as maintenance and just go get that done to eliminate it, because it probably needs to be done anyway, and see if that helps. And then maybe we start chasing down the problem.
Let's go ahead and go with Judy on 01 Buick Century. Go ahead, Judy. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi. I just want to thank you for your program. I'm a lady that doesn't know too much about cars, but I have a 2001 Buick Century. And I noticed, after being gone about 4 months, the car sat for a while till my kids started driving it. But I have my coolant light keeps popping on, and I took it over to Sears, and they said, it was probably the sensory or maybe a bubble in it, because the light stayed on and I had plenty of fluid. Prior to that, I knew I had an oil leak, and then the second time I took it over, maybe about a week ago, he said there was oil going into the coolant, and not to drive it until I could afford to get it fixed. So I just kind of wanted your advice on what you think is happening. It's quite an expensive procedure, I guess. It's something to do with the gaskets and the manifold. And
yeah. How many miles are in this car, Judy?
Oh, dear.
Roughly, round number.
The dashboard is broken, or there's no lights that come up, so I have no idea. I bought it a couple years back. It had about 60,000 on it.
Okay. That's normal. So this is probably a pretty, when I say simple repair, I mean all things are simple if you know what you're doing. I don't know.
No wonder everything's so hard.
No wonder it is. I think a full mechanical shop, like one of the ones you would find on Bumper to Bumper, would be a place to go. I don't know that Sears is the right spot for that. They're good for batteries and oil changes and some of that stuff. So there's two things that are happening, or multiple things happening here, but the first thing, there is a level sensor either in the radiator or in what we call an expansion tank up on the maybe on the fender well under the hood or something like in that area. And when that gets low, it's just like the float in your toilet, kinda. It doesn't add water, but it turns on the light. Sometimes those floats will get saturated. They're foam sometimes, or they're a air ball that they get penetrated and they sink. So that could be why the light was on, or it was on because it was low because you're losing this coolant into the oil. And this is a fairly common problem. You probably have a 3.1 liter engine in that car, and likely what's happening is the intake manifold gasket is leaking and allowing the coolant to mix with the water. And the advice to not drive that car is very good. Do not drive it, because you could ruin the bottom end of the engine, a bearing, wash out a bearing because there's not proper lubrication, and go to a very expensive repair from what could be, you could do that repair several different ways. Aaron, do you guys do just a gasket, or do you tend to maybe, hey, while we're there, let's take care of the spark plug wire, we're going to put a thermostat? Or
It all depends. We look at it all and see how bad they are. If the plugs are bad or the wires are bad right there, you have it apart, change them out, or just go and do the gasket. A lot of cars you can do.
Yeah, and then we've got to do probably 2 oil changes, get all the gook
out of there.
And so it's a... All right, Nathan has a Volkswagen Passat, and he's been patiently waiting. What can we help you with on your '02 Volkswagen, Nathan?
Hey guys, I had a radiator replaced probably about 3 or 4 months ago from an oil cooler that went bad, and luckily it's something that we caught soon, so no more gunk in my cooling system. But after the repair was done, my AC stopped working. It blows, everything comes on, compressor kicks on, fan kicks on. It just doesn't get cold. So I took it over to a friend's house who had a gauge that I could hook up to the system, and there was definitely Freon in there. So I'm kind of at a loss for what it could be.
What makes you think there was definitely Freon in there?
Well, we got one of those charging kits that he had the gauge from that he used on a Mini Cooper that he has. So we popped it on there, and basically we read the pressure, and it said it was it was full.
Okay, what was that pressure? Because I don't know. Maybe some of those do-it-yourself kits there is a line that says full, but I doubt it.
It wasn't number-wise. It was color-coded, so
Okay.
it was like yellow, green, red.
Okay.
That may not be the order, but that was the basics of it.
Sure.
Can you? I would say, just one way is go under, with the hood open, grab the air conditioning lines, and one of them should be hot and one of them should be cold if everything's running, and that's going to tell us that air conditioning action is happening. Then maybe we have an airflow issue in the car with some blend door issue like we talked about earlier. So we need to know if that's really happening, because if that line's not getting cold, we're not getting cooling.
Well, and it's only half the story, too. The problem on that system is I believe that's a constant run compressor. So it's not that the compressor's on, it's always on. You can't even turn it off, and it's got a variable vane inside that is changing the compression of that. So ideally, let's just say generically speaking, if you have 40 pounds of pressure on the low side, you would maybe be producing 40-degree air at best. You also need to have high pressure, because the high and the low pressure, where that goes through an expansion valve or an orifice, that's where it changes from a liquid to a gas and condenses it, and all the stuff that happens with the gases. Ward Atkinson's probably going to call me. I'm not saying it right.
Selling curses.
But we don't know what the high side pressure is. We have to know the high side. If it's not pumping and making pressure, you can have low side all you want. It might just be the static pressure, so you're not going to make cold air. But like Dave said, the fat lines, the bigger lines, are the low pressure, and they should be cold to the touch. And the highs should almost be where you can't hold on to them for much more than a second or two, because that pressure should be 220 pounds maybe, so that's 200 degrees roughly.
Thanks so much for the call, Nathan. And if you do bring that into like a bumper-to-bumper shop, again, $100 to $200, get you evacuate and recharge if there's no obvious leaks. So that may be a place to go. We're going to go with Laurel in Ahwatukee on a 2005 Murano. Go ahead, Laurel. You're on Bumper to Bumper.
Hi, guys. I was calling because I've been having an issue for about 3 months now. Taking it into my mechanic, they looked at it for 3 days. And basically what's happening is when I accelerate, it doesn't matter what speed I'm going. When I accelerate, my car has a really nasty jerk. And sometimes it's just minor, and sometimes it's really bad. And after 3 days of having it, they called in a diagnostic specialist. They couldn't figure anything out. And I was just curious if you guys might have any ideas as to what it could be. I mean, I feel like they've tried everything, but...
Is this jerk so hard that it would spill your coffee in the cup holder kind of jerk?
Sometimes it depends on, like, if I'm going around 50, 60, and I decelerate and then I accelerate again, sometimes it can be that bad. But it's not always that bad.
And is it fairly consistent? Because that's going to make it a hard or easy problem to fix. If we can duplicate it over and over again, it's just a matter of hooking up test tools and different test tools till we get to what may be causing it. So is it consistent?
Unfortunately, it's not very consistent. You could drive it for 10 minutes, and it wouldn't do it at all. And then, you might be at a stoplight and accelerate, and then it does it really bad. It really is very inconsistent, which is, I think, the most frustrating thing about it.
Right. I would say, to figure this out here on radio is going to be tough. Send us an email at bumpertobumperradio.com. That comes to either Matt's or my email. We both see it. And we've got some Nissan experts, Joel at Arizona Imports. We'll run it by him and see if he's run into it or knows of anything. And look at the problem database. A lot of Muranos on the road. Somebody's probably ran into that before. So maybe we'll get lucky there. Otherwise, other than that, it's just good diagnostic, which is going to be hooking up test tools and driving it and making it happen.
Is that shop able to duplicate the problem and they just can't figure it out? Okay. Wow.
Yeah, they were able to duplicate it. Like I said, they had it for 3 days, and they kept trying all different things. They put in new parts. The new parts weren't making a difference. Like I said, they called in a specialist, and he hooked up all of his special tools, and they couldn't get it to trigger anything through the computer system of the car, and so they just couldn't. They could never give me a final diagnosis. They told me to try filling it with premium fuel. For a couple times, I was using just regular, not so fabulous fuel, and so they said use a Chevron Techron for a couple tanks and see if that makes a difference, and it really hasn't.
Oops.
Right. Well, fuel. I mean, she brought up fuel, but that's a good point because that's our blog at ktr.com. Matt wrote a nice blog about which fuel you should be using, but it 3 days in a shop. Well, that sounds like a long time. For an intermittent issue, it's not. And one of the pressures that we feel, I mean, just letting you know as the consumer, is we feel bad when we don't have an answer right away and you're calling back. It's tough. Sometimes we gotta set it off to the side, think about it, think, hey, we can hook up this tool, that tool, the other tool, and then go road test it. And then we have to make it happen while we're looking at the tools. The other thing, I mean, there's some logging that we can do with some scanners to see what goes offline. But if it's that abrupt, something's got to be coming up. Something's going offline.
Yeah, and what we do, too, at our shop is fairly often is we'll have a technician just drive the car home. If you can allow them to do that, and gas won't be your problem, but there's something there, and it's obviously a tough one.